feel insecure or anxious in relationships? Have you ever stayed in a toxic situation too long? If so, you may have an anxious attachment style that is often rooted in an adverse childhood experience. Fortunately, there are ways to heal. Hello, I'm Chester Elton, and this is my dear friend and co-author, Adrian Gostick.
Well, thanks, Jess. Yeah, on this show, we will talk about how to feel more secure in who you are. We'll talk about cultivating your self-worth, self-trust, and confidence, and maybe how to approach your life and relationships from a place of calm and connectedness. That all sounds great, doesn't it? Now, as always, we hope the time you spend with us will help reduce the stigma of anxiety at work and in your personal life.
And with us is our new friend, Jennifer Nurick. She is a clinical psychotherapist and energetic healer who has worked with people to help them heal from attachment, adoptions, and childhood trauma. She has a master's degree in applied psychotherapy and counseling and is the author of the book, Heal Your Anxious Attachment, and is the host of the Psychotherapy Central podcast. Jennifer, we are delighted to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for finding the time.
And thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we're thrilled to get started here. This anxious attachment style, as Chester and I were chatting before you joined, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've got that. So tell us a little bit about what this looks like. How do I know if I have it?
Yeah, and you're not alone if you're feeling like, oh, I think I have that. It's about 25% of the population. So there's a lot of us out there. So one of the key ways is to know is that there's this sort of heightened sensitivity to relational distance. So anything that might signal your partner moving away, and it could be quite subtle signs that, oh, they're not really listening, or I said something and they looked away. And it can be quite big things. You know, your partner's going away for a period of time and you're not really sure about where they're going or who they're with, and you're just feeling insecure and unsafe. It can be a heightened sensitivity to your partner's emotional states and their actions. Again, it's so it might be that you feel that more of a relational distance, and you might have a feeling of, oh, I feel sick in my stomach, or I feel this panic in my chest. So those are kind of somatic in the psychotherapy babble. We call that kind of somatic reactions. There might also be this need to have reassurance and validation from your partner. So what we're really asking when we're asking for reassurance and validation is, am I safe? Is this relationship safe? Do you have my back? Can I depend on you? And the last thing I talk about a bit is about the fear of conflict. And so that can lead to a people-pleasing behavior, or letting boundaries be stepped over, and then maybe a big eruption later on. And that's because the fear
it's
of
so
the
interesting
conflict.
That you talk about that, the need to be a pleaser and so on in our personal relationships. I think we kind of get that, you know. Talk to us a little bit about how the work dynamics can seem like those kind of same family dynamics or relationship dynamics. So how do attachment styles manifest in the workplace, and what can we do about that?
I have a great story here from a friend of mine who's given me permission to share it. And she was having this experience with her boss, who her colleagues were finding really tricky. And so they were coming to her for counsel. How do I manage this person? And what she realized was, oh my goodness, it was a male boss. This male boss has very similar behaviors to my father. And her siblings, she acted as the go-between peacemaker at home in her family of origin dynamic. That was kind of her place in the system. In order to keep balance in the system, that was her role, peacekeeper. And so the siblings would come to her. And she said, oh, Jen, I'm doing exactly the same thing. It's playing out again. And so what she did in that situation, when she got the awareness around it, was she would say lovingly to her colleagues, I'm aware that I've been doing this kind of peacekeeper role and it's a burden on me. It's causing me heaviness and stress. And so I'm going to step back from that role. And I would love for you to have a direct relationship with with the boss. Yeah. So I think it can show up in lots of different ways. It could be a replication of a family role, like the peacekeeper, the mediator, the one who gets things done, the leader. Often the oldest sibling will take on leadership roles, so it can play into our leadership style. You might take a role in your family more of caretaker, and so you might find that you like to be 2IC, like to support the leader. And remembering a workplace a culture can often be, in a way, like a family system. And I often say to clients, what was the emotional temperature of the house you grew up in? And often we can ask the same thing about work. What's the emotional temperature at work? Often there's a flavor and there's a culture. That's why there's big money in changing workplace culture.
It's interesting, yeah, because I mean that's what we do, and but it's interesting that you talk about this, and some of those things you talked about. I mean, being a mediator, being a leader, are rewarded in the workplace, and so in some ways, the workplace may reward behavior that may not be really positive for us as people.
Yeah, and I guess it depends. I mean, you would know better than me. There's lots of different leadership styles, and some can be quite. I was going to use the word toxic, but then I'm like, it can be uncomfortable, let's say, for the people around. And then there's leadership styles that can really build people up and really help people in the space between where they are and where they want to be as employees. So it depends on often what kind of leadership we saw at home will often be an instinct to replicate that, because that's how we saw stuff get done.
Yeah.
Do you see that in your work?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely the different leadership styles, that there's things like you say, being a mediator because you want what is best for the parties, and being a mediator because you hate conflict. And so absolutely see that I see exactly where you're coming from with that. Yeah, and people I think smell it on you too, is that yeah, this person wants to mediate to get the best idea out there versus no, they just hate anything conflicty, if you will. I want to dig a little into this, active attachment styles, because there's
Mm.
so many things that can make us feel what we call, of course, reactive. So when my reactive, genes are, are tickled there, so what are some healthy ways to maybe act when my attachment style is activated?
Yeah, that's interesting. The word act, because it's kind of, where's that balance between honoring what's going on inside of me? Because essentially, whenever we have a trigger, right, which is what we're talking about when we feel reactive, we can think of that as kind of, well, I've been triggered. And for me, um,
Yeah.
a strong reaction where we can logically think, okay, my reaction internally and maybe externally as well is beyond what has happened in this situation. So the way that I frame that is that often there are other parts of us that are holding hurt from a similar situation in the past, that are remembering that pain and saying, basically, I'm not okay with this. And so, although it might be happening in the situation when I'm 35 with my 45-year-old boss, a part of me that's 8 years old and is shouting at my father is being triggered. So we can think of it a bit like time traveling. That's how I think of it as a trauma therapist, right? It's a bit like we've kind of time traveled, and that 8-year-old part is the part that's having the strong reaction. So I always think it's kind of tricky. Like, how do we balance that part, that tightrope of honoring what's going on inside and caring for the parts that have been triggered, upset, hurt, and be at work or be in our relationship, and not say and do things that we might really regret and feel a lot of shame about later. So first, notice what's happening. Okay. And that might be, I'm really aware of, oh, I've got this flood of anger coming through my body. Whoa, that's so powerful. And I might even have awe in it. Whoa, that is so strong. And in the moment, I mean, I talk a lot about resources, and therapists will talk about resources. So what works for you in order to calm you down in that moment? And I think that is different for everybody. So for me, taking a long, deep breath in through my nose and taking a long exhalation out through my mouth. Sometimes I'll move my toes on the floor so that I can feel my feet on the floor. Sometimes that's too far for people. It's easier to kind of feel something around the belly. Some people will find squeezing the hands. So something that might be kind of grounding, that keeps you present in the moment. Yeah. Some people will find that in that moment that they need to have a moment. They need to kind of go to the bathroom, just take a moment, and then come back later after they've thought about it a bit and calm down. Later on, reflecting on the trigger. So what was the trigger? Is it the criticism? Is it a fear of conflict? Is it in high pressure situations? That's my default I move into, so that you get an understanding of the trigger and then can respond differently. But it's hard to do that in the moment, I think, when we're having that strong reaction. So that's more for later on. And then therapy can be super helpful. What do you find is helpful when people are triggered in those moments?
Yeah, no, it is interesting, that idea of reflection, really taking a minute to step back. And like you said, everybody's a little different, whether they clasp their hands or whether their toes. I go right to chocolate. I just find that that's really.
There's probably worse things to go to, but
Yeah. You're right, Adrian. There's a lot worse things you can go to other than chocolate.
Totally.
Jennifer, I really want to ask this question about, so how do you move past that anxious fear of abandonment? You mentioned energetic tools in your writings and other ways, but how do you really move past that heavy weight? It seems to me that that's a lot to carry.
Mm. It's not simple. If it was really simple, there would be a one-day course or a tablet that we would take and it would be all done. What we're talking about when we have attachment adaptations is that we've had a repeated experience of not being attuned to, of reaching out and not being met. And so we're working with an imprint, right? So it isn't an overnight fix. It's a journey. And the way that I've worked with it, and I work with it in my practice, and this is how I talk about it in my book, is the first part of that work is internal. So how do I form an internal secure attachment where the parts of me that might be panicked in a certain situation or uncertain or in pain, how can I form a secure attachment with them? And so some of the work I use there is internal family systems, is inner child reparenting work, and other kinds of trauma work. Because remember, it's a form of trauma when we have that reaching out and I'm not met. I'm reaching out and I'm not met. It's like Gabor Mate talks about 1,000 tiny paper cuts. It's like that. Am I answering your question? I forgot your question.
It's just how do you get past these things? Like you say, you get that centered. You go to those good attachments, right?
Yeah. So internally, also through some of the somatic work, so some of the stuff again that gets imprinted kind of in the body, so somatically. And then the second part of how I've done it in my own world is externally in relationship. So looking at sort of secure behaviors in relationship, but also using the relationship as that happened and something came up there. Let me get curious about that, and taking that into therapy, taking that into my personal work. So I see 50% of it being kind of that internal attachment, and then 50% of it being attachment with other. Yeah. So self-soothing is part of that, right? Is part of the polyvagal work. Again, I talk about that in the book. That's in chapter 6. And how we self-soothe is different for everybody. For some people, they'll love a hug. Give me a hug, I feel so calm. And for other people, do not touch me. If you give me a hug and you're all over me, that's the worst thing you could do. And so
Yeah.
we really have to learn ourselves and get curious about, what is it that I need when I need to be soothed? What works for me? It might be the chocolate. It might be a self hug, lots of different things.
Yeah.
Those reparenting the younger parts, the somatic work, and then being in relationship with others where there is a sense that I can reach out and I'm met in the way that I need. And that can be a learning process even as an adult, and learning to understand how in the moment I need to be met and want to be met. Because our partner might be reaching out and feeling like, well, I hugged you for long enough. Like I gave you like a 5-second hug. That felt long to me. And I might say, well, when I really feel into it, I was really distressed about that thing that had just happened. And I needed a 10-second hug. Like I needed double. And
And double. I like that expression. It's so interesting that you mentioned that it's something that you learn as you go. My wife and I celebrated our 40-year wedding anniversary last year, and I like to think we have a wonderful marriage. I think she would say the same. I would hope she would. And it's interesting that you're right. When I need comfort, I need her to be close to me and physical with me, right?
yeah,
And when she is upset, it's you give her space. And it
yeah.
was something that was hard for me to learn because I would say, well, you're upset. You don't you want someone close by? And she'd go, just give me a minute, you know. And it was really important for me to learn that. And now, we've been together for so long. When I kind of see it coming, I just sort of immediately just give her space and distance. So I love that you're talking about be curious and learn what your partner needs and adjust to that. Yeah. Really good advice. Thank
Beautiful,
you.
Chester. That's just such a beautiful example of how it emerges and how in relationship we're always learning each other, but also learning about ourselves. It might only be in reflection of, I didn't get a long enough hug. And then I got to the fridge and you'd eaten the half of my takeaway that I'd left in the fridge. And then I had an explosion, and it might only
Yeah.
be in retrospect that we sort of track back and go, actually, I really needed a bit more of a hug. And yeah, side note, please check before you eat the second half of my takeaway.
Hey, this has been great, Jennifer, having you on. By the way, we need to mention your new book is called "Heal Your Anxious Attachment." Came out February of this year, so congratulations on the new
Thank
book.
you.
That's always fun. How do people learn more about your work? Where would you send them?
Yeah, best place is probably my Instagram, psychotherapy.central. I manage that account myself, so if you message me there or write a comment, you're speaking directly to me. I also have a podcast, Psychotherapy Central, and YouTube channel. It's all the same. And the website is psychotherapycentral.health.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Okay, so last question for me. Give us some other maybe practical ways. If you're thinking about how do I build now resilience, how do I build more of a secure attachment style? So, what are some things, some lasting kind of last thoughts you would give us to put us on the right road here?
First up is if you feel like you're working with an attachment injuries, get really curious. Which one do I feel like I present with? Is it the anxious, avoidant, or the disorganized? And you can take a look in my book. You can have a look online. There's heaps of stuff out there describing them. Usually people will read through that and they'll know straight away, oh, that one's me. And so that's really your starting places, and then getting curious and reading some material around it. And yeah, obviously, if you have the anxious one, I would recommend my book. It's very broad, my book, and covers a lot of different areas, and is very focused on how to heal it. So a lot of books have kind of 9 chapters on what it is, 1 on how to heal. This one has got 9 chapters on how to heal. The first chapter only is on what it is. So there's a lot of how to, and there's like 20 meditation practices that are downloadable that go with the book. So it's very much practices that we do over and over again, getting curious inside, getting curious relationally.
Excellent. So that's for the masses. We always love to hear from our guests. What are some of your personal, you know, um, rituals and tactics that you use to keep yourself, centered and in a good place?
Mm. I find that mine change. I find depending on the season, depending on how my body's feeling, that they will change. At the moment, I've been noticing that I've been getting achy hips. And so one of my rituals is I do 2 sun salutes, both sides every morning. I do a bit of warrior pose and some spinal twisting. It takes me 10 minutes. I do it every single morning before I sit down. I did it this morning before I saw you. Holidays is a really big thing for me. I feel like I'm good to be in this 9 to 5 kind of cycle if I know I've got a holiday coming.
Mm-hmm.
So holidays are super important for me, really having that time to down-regulate. And I have sleep for me is really big. Again, for some people it's not, but for me it's really important. I really need a minimum of 8 hours. Ideal is 9, 10 is awesome.
Wow.
So
Wow.
bed before 10 p.m. I saw the Dalai Lama speak in Sydney about 6 years ago. No, maybe longer. Anyway, time ago. And one of the things he said, I was at a 3-day event with him. And one of the things he said is, we need 8 hours of sleep a day. And my husband was with me, and I gave him a little look, and he smirked at me because he's always laughing at me about the sleep. But the Dalai Lama said to have a clear mind, 8 hours of sleep is optimal, 8 hours or more.
You know, it's so funny you mentioned that, because I think if I slept for 10 hours, my wife would call an ambulance to come here. She would think,
or the coroner.
I think he's dead. He's been asleep for 10 hours. Good advice.
Awesome. That's great advice. No, and I love, you're right. Different things, different times. Don't get set into a routine because, we're all different. But I love this idea of putting the past in our past, Jennifer, and working through some things to be more secure in who we are. So we want to thank you for joining us today. This has been just such a delight. Very, very helpful for our listeners. I know that. And we wish you the best of luck with this new book. Encourage everybody to pick up a copy today and to heal their own anxious attachment style. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us.
And thank you so much, Adrian and Chester, for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, Chess, another really interesting podcast. I love that we do these because where else would we get to spend half an hour talking about anxious attachment style? And yet, as Jennifer Nurick goes through this, we go, ooh, wow. Oh, yeah. Am I doing that? Or do I know people? And so, always these become more about how we learn and we can grow from this. But first off, anxiety at work, does this come into the workplace? Yeah. So why are we maybe acting some of the ways we are? Maybe we're a peacekeeper, but is it driven by fear? Maybe we're a mediator, but it's driven by our past. So are we being really self-reflective in who we are and how we got here?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting when she said, look, the workplace is very much like the family dynamic. Like you say, you play your role. It's interesting. I'm here. She mentioned being on holiday was important for her mental health. I'm here on holiday in Palm Springs with my brothers, and I'm the youngest of 5. And it's so funny when we get together, I am immediately the little brother. I mean, I know
and
what my
you're
role
like
is.
In your 30s now, right?
Yeah. Oh, to be in my 30s again. Yeah. It is really interesting. You automatically slot into that role where, I don't take the lead. I'm the last one to speak, still the funniest and the most engaging, but the last.
The most handsome, but
yeah, that's right. So that idea that does translate into the workplace, that when her friend talked to her, she said, this is the dynamic that you had with your father. And you should maybe step back and, instead of being the peacekeeper and the mediator, arrange for your fellow employees to go directly to the person. The other thing that I took away was this idea about being anxious about your partner and how that translates. Because you and I have been partners for 25 years. We've got a relationship. If things start to go a little awry, or they're not showing up, or maybe they're not talking as much, and this idea of trying to mitigate that by being a pleaser really spoke to me. This idea of I'm going to try to make everything just right, and I'm going to try to do my best to make everybody happy,
Because I think both you and I can fall into that a little bit. Yeah, we want to be
no
pleasers.
question.
And sometimes, that's not best for your business, and sometimes no, you need to be a little stronger. And so this was really insightful. I liked your points too about so when we find ourselves falling into these traps, She said a few things. First off, notice what's happening. Where is it hitting in your body? How does it feel? Then secondly, what calms you down? Immediately, like, do I need to take a deep breath? I know you like to go for a walk.
Yeah.
My son Anthony taught me 6-5-4, where you kind of use all your senses, touch 5 things, see 6 things, and you bring yourself to the present when you're getting overwhelmed, which is a great thing. And then she said, finally, later reflect on the trigger. Don't try and figure it all out in the moment, because it's too hard to do right then.
Yes, that reflection part I thought was so interesting. We don't often take the time just to sit back and say, okay, so why was I triggered? What happened there? And how can I be better prepared for it next time? So often we hear, for your mental health is take a deep breath. She said, go to the bathroom, go for a walk, take some time, sit down and say, hey, let me figure this out so that I'm better prepared for next time. I thought she was just a delightful guest with really interesting insights on those family dynamics, a long time ago that creep into our lives and our work lives. And we got to figure stuff out like that,
We do. And we want to thank you all for joining us today. We want to thank our guest, Jennifer Nurick. We want to thank our producer, Brent Klein, Christy Lawrence, who helps us find amazing guests. And we want to thank all of you who listened in, especially if you download the podcast that helps build our network. We'd also love you to visit thecultureworks.com for some free resources to help you and your team thrive, including information about our best-selling book, Anxiety at Work, and our latest book, The Gratitude Habit.
Yeah, and we're really excited to give you a special offer from Lit Video Books. Our book, Anxiety at Work, has been made into a 29-minute video book. It's the latest and greatest way to learn. And if you're interested in learning how you can utilize Lit for your leadership development and employee growth, all you have to do is go to litvideobooks.com. It's LIT videobooks.com/lit-4-teams. We'll put that in the show notes for you. And that's where you'll fill out some information. It'll say, tell us more about your interest. Tell them that Chester and Adrian sent you, and that way you get the author network discount. And, as my dad always say, if you've got to pay retail, you haven't got enough friends. So tell them Chester and Adrian sent you and get that author discount. We also love speaking in conferences and to companies. We do it all over the world, in person or virtually. We speak on culture, we speak on teamwork, resilience, anxiety at work. Give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about your event. Well, Adrian, another great half hour together. I'll give you the last word.
That was, yeah. No, we are. I'm about to go to Madrid. Chester just got back from Dubai. We love traveling the world, and that's not Madrid, Idaho, or Dubai, Illinois. They are actually those places around the world. And so, yeah, we'd love that. Give us a call. And until next time, we wish you the best of mental health.